Welcome to the Des Moines Register Political Soapbox. I'm Rachel Stassenberger, the political editor for the Register. And first, a few ground rules. You can cheer, you can applaud, no heckling, no jeering, because the crowd will turn on you, because Iowa nice is a thing, right? There are also no signs allowed, so if you have a sign, please lower it during the soapbox speech. Thank you. Please lower it during the soapbox speech. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Fred Hubbell up to the stage. 2 more seconds. To keep all the introductions the same, he's a Democrat running for governor against Republican Kim Reynolds. Now,
that's nice. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. As she said, my name is Fred Hubbell, lifelong progressive Democrat, 5th generation Iowan, running for governor of Iowa. So 2 days ago, I was here. I was lucky enough to go out there and flip pork chops at the pork producer's tent. Had one of my favorite fair foods, pork chop on a stick. So I hope you're all getting a chance to get your favorite fair food. There's a guy there. He's got his going. Smart guy. So first of all, I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank my running mate, Rita Hart. She grew up on a farm north of here, lives on a farm in eastern Iowa. She's been a school teacher for 20 years, state senator for 6 years, lives in rural Iowa, and she's going to be a great lieutenant governor. Charlotte Hubbell, my wife of almost 42 years over here, has been my partner for a long, long time. And I want to thank the Des Moines Register for inviting us all to be here for the soapbox today. So thank you, Des Moines Register, Rachel. You know, my wife and I have been spending a lot of the last 30 years working to support the progressive values and quality of life that make Iowa a wonderful state to not only live in, but to raise a family in and go to work. I used to chair the board of Planned Parenthood. I served on the Mercy Hospital board, in each case trying to expand access to health care and the affordability of health care in our state. I've chaired the Simpson College Board. I've chaired the Iowa College Foundation Board, trying to improve access to higher education for people all across Iowa. My wife and I have been involved in numerous environmental causes all across this state, trying to help improve our air and water quality so we can improve the health of all citizens of this state. Governor Culver asked me in 2007 to chair the Iowa Power Fund Board, a 4-year project investing state funds in renewable energy, renewable fuels, and energy efficiency all over the state of Iowa. But you know, last year, 2017, we all watched the fiscal mismanagement and the misguided priorities of this Republican governor and the legislature be virtually running our state into the ground. You know, they defunded Planned Parenthood. They continued the privatization of Medicaid, which is just causing harm and pain to thousands of Iowans across our state. It's an absolute failure. They've done nothing to support mental health and substance abuse crisis all across Iowa. They've underfunded education 6 years in a row. They've reduced funding to community colleges and our region schools, actually reduced it 3 years in a row. And they stripped collective bargaining rights from working families all across our state. But they've continued to fully prioritize and fund what I call wasteful tax giveaways. So the combination of all those cuts and the funding going the wrong direction with the wrong priority is causing a lot of harm and suffering all across our state. So last year, at the end of last year's legislative session, Governor Reynolds said many times that was the best legislative session she's ever seen. My wife and I looked at each other and we said, that's pretty scary, because we thought it was the worst legislative session we'd ever seen in our state. And that was a tipping point for me to decide to run for governor of our state. We need a governor who's going to come in and turn this state around and get it going in the right direction. But in order to do that, we need somebody who's got the skills and experience to fix this budget mess and put in place the right priorities to support people. I've been working my entire career, public sector, private sector, managing complex budgets in a lot of different scenarios, nonprofits, large companies, state government. So I know what it looks like and how hard it is to make those, to actually accomplish those budgets and deliver results for people. I used to chair the Yonkers department store business. Remember that in the 1980s when we had the farm crisis? The worst fiscal crisis, the worst farm crisis our state has ever faced since the Great Depression. So what did we do? We created Yonkers Farm Aid Scholarships so young kids could go to school because their parents couldn't afford it during that crisis. We worked with Willie Nelson to bring Farm Aid concerts to the Midwest to raise money for struggling farm families. And then after Yonkers, I worked with Equitable Life Insurance Company. We had life insurance agencies all across Iowa and many other states. And one of our best agencies was just a little ways from here in Red Oak, Iowa. Mildred Parker had an agency in Red Oak, Iowa, was one of the best in the state and in the country for our company that did business all across this state. Governor Culver also asked me, about that same time, to go to work at the Iowa Department of Economic Development. You might remember, 2009, we had a film tax credit scandal that was costing Iowans tens of millions of dollars. He fired the executive director, asked me to go in and help fix the crisis there. I worked with the Attorney General's office to save the state tens of millions of dollars. So I know what a fiscal mismanagement and a crisis looks like, and I've proven I know how to fix it. And so we need a governor who's got the leadership skills and the experience to produce a balanced budget with the right priorities that people need and deserve in this state. Governor Reynolds has taken what was in 2013 a $900 million surplus at the state level, and now she owes $144 million to the state reserve funds. That's over $1 billion that's gone out of the state funds, ladies and gentlemen, and she's done it while she's prioritized those wasteful tax giveaways, cut funding for education, cut funding for health care, and made precious little investments in rural Iowa and our communities all across this state. That's what needs to change. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to turn this state around? It starts with having the right values. The first value, which I think is very important, is in my entire career, public and private sector, nonprofit work, what I have focused on is trying to identify what unites people rather than what divides them. That doesn't mean that you sacrifice your core progressive values, but there's always things you agree on with people. I don't care if somebody's got a good idea that comes from the Republican side, independent side, or Democratic side. If it's a good idea for the people of Iowa, we should all work together to put it in place. We also need a governor who's going to put people first in our state again. You know, this administration has turned its back on everyday Iowans. So let's talk about these tariffs and the trade war. We need a governor who's going to stand up for Iowans, not stand up for who's in Washington, D.C. When you're elected governor, you're elected to serve the citizens of our state, not a party, and not who's ever in D.C. It doesn't matter who it is. You have to represent Iowans. We should have been standing up against these trade wars and the tariffs before it even started. There are a lot of other ways to deal with China than start a trade war on the back of Iowa farmers. Iowa farmers don't want a handout. Iowa farmers want good, open markets so they can supply their products, which are going to do extremely well if the markets are open and fair. That's what we need. We need a governor who's going to stand up for Iowans and protect the interests of agriculture, our farming community, rural Iowa, and our farmers as a first obligation. But we also need to restore the respect and dignity to our working families all across this state. And by that I mean that we need to restore Chapter 20 in our state, and we need to give collective bargaining rights back to our state workers and our school teachers. And we need to reverse those very harmful changes that were not necessary that were made to our workers' compensation law so that workers who are injured in the job get fair compensation again. So how are we going to do all these things? It starts with putting the budget behind the priorities. Governor Reynolds talks about education, she talks about mental health, she talks about future ready, but if you look at her budget is completely separated. There's no connection between the two. She's not funding education. She's not funding healthcare. She's not funding infrastructure. If you have a priority, it's only really a priority when you put the budget behind the priority. So our budget is going to be focused on three key things: putting people first with higher incomes, better access to education, and better access to healthcare. So let's talk about incomes for Iowans. You know, the United Ways all across our state recently worked together to produce a study. And they showed across the entire state of Iowa that 40% of the working families in our state can't even afford their basic living needs of food, shelter, and clothing. 2 years ago, that number was close to 20%. Now it's close to 40%. Something's not working with this administration. They're not helping people. And this tax cut they came out with, most of the benefit for that goes to the wealthy. It doesn't go to those 40% who need it and are getting left behind. And then if you look at what's going on with our infrastructure, we need to invest in education and healthcare, high-speed internet, and affordable housing all across this state, because we're not making those investments. That's how we can get our communities growing. That's how we can actually raise wages, because we're going to have a higher, better trained, better educated, more healthy citizens to go to work. We also need to raise that minimum wage at the state level. And then we need to change what they did and make it easier and make it allowable for local communities to raise their minimum wage higher if they want to. Local communities know more about what makes sense in their community than everybody sitting in this Capitol right here. Let's have more local control. The second key priority is education. We need to make sure that every Iowan has access to quality, lifelong learning, and we need to aspire to be one of the best states in the country for education like we used to be. It starts with making pre-K for 4-year-olds available all across the state all day long, so that we help those young families who can't afford daycare for that extra half a day. And let's fully fund our K-12 public schools again. Our teachers have more and more demands placed on them and fewer resources. We all know how that works. Their jobs get tougher and their jobs become less attractive. They don't have collective bargaining rights, so fewer and fewer people want to be teachers in our state again. That's the wrong direction. We need to make that profession attractive again by restoring those collective bargaining rights and investing in our schools. And if we properly balance the state budget by stopping those wasteful giveaways, we can support our region schools and our community colleges so people won't have to have ever-increasing tuition and ever-increasing student debt. It's not the region's problem, it's the governors and legislatures, the Republicans' problem for not balancing the budget properly with the right priorities. But we also need to focus on job training. You know, I've been to Independence, Iowa, and some other communities where there is no job training going on in those high schools. So what do those young kids do when they get out of school? They either go to college and pick up a bunch of student debt, or they leave our state. We need to have job training in every community, every high school across Iowa, so people have an alternative pathway to a 4-year school and 4 years of debt. They can learn a skill, learn a trade. We have a lot of those jobs available in our state. Let's give people that alternative pathway in every community in our state. The third key priority is health care. It's unbelievable to me when I travel across the state, just walking around here, Republicans, independents come up to me and say, look, I'm voting for you because the privatization of Medicaid is hurting my family. I'm voting for you because we have mental health in our community and our state's not doing anything about it. So we need to stop this privatization of Medicaid, bring it back into state control on day one. We need to put in place the plan that we put out in December to address mental health and substance abuse at the beginning of our administration. It's an excellent plan based on traveling around the state, 6 county jails, 10 different roundtable discussions with people involved in mental health, including a lot of people who have mental health and substance abuse issues. It's time to stop the rhetoric and start making improvements. And we need to restore funding to Planned Parenthood so those 15,000 Iowans can have access to the doctors of their choice. But there's one other very important issue for health care.
Attention on the grounds. Would Dylan Turner
Time out.
meet with the closest police officer or information
You don't count
booth?
this, right?
Dylan Turner meet with the closest police officer or information booth. Thank you.
All right, so that other issue for health care is air and water quality. You know, a lot of people don't realize it, but we're losing 5 tons of topsoil per acre per year in our state. If that continues, pretty soon there's not going to be a heck of a lot of topsoil left in Iowa. So we've got to work harder to preserve that topsoil and improve the organic content. We also need to protect our water quality. Water and our land are 2 of the best assets that we have in our state. It's not an urban-rural issue. It's not an us-them. This is an Iowa issue. We've known about this issue, both issues, for a long time. We need to work together to have permanent, long-term solutions to address this topsoil issue as well as our water quality. And I want to be the leader on that. So I hope you've got the message. Our campaign is about investing in people again. We want to stop all these reductions in jobs, reductions in the numbers of employees working for our state, reduction in benefits, reduction in services, and start investing in our people. Our people are our biggest and best asset in Iowa. If we invest in our people, we invest in our communities, and if we work together, we can get Iowa growing the right way. That way, more communities and more people will benefit. So thank you all for being here. We'd love to get your support in the November election. We got a lot of momentum, but we need a lot more volunteers. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much.